Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another Total War Warhammer video, which today we're going to be talking about confederations. This is a topic that I've gone into quite a bit on streams. It's something I kind of always have playing in the back of my head because it's relevant to the experience a lot of us have when playing Total War Warhammer, and a lot of players, a significant amount of the player base, really enjoy kind of the good brain chemicals you get from collecting all the legendary lord Pokemon of the various factions that you may be playing. But nonetheless, I have been thinking about ways to improve Confederation or even add it in where it doesn't exist for certain factions. So today I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about my ideas and thoughts and sharing them with you all to see if you agree with anything that I say or if y'all think of anything that I didn't think of down in the comment section. So let's talk about what many Total War players consider to be a critical component of their experience and see if we can figure out some potential built-in routes to Confederation beyond just the boring situation of, using the diplomacy system, but something that's a little more deeply ingrained for the specific factions. So let's start with the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are a very unique force in that they were kind of the first major faction we got that didn't have Confederation at all as a concept. Like, I think the Warriors of Chaos also didn't originally have it, but the Tomb Kings kind of, a lot of people expected them to have Confederation, and then they just don't. I think that they should have Confederation with the exception of Settra. It's kind of one of those things where Settra the Imperishable's entire thing is him declaring for all the world to hear that Settra does not serve, he rules. So it kind of feels wrong to allow him to be confederated by anyone, even if that kind of is an annoying mechanic for players that want to play as the other three Tomb King lords but still want to acquire Settra. But I think that's just such an important gimmick for him as a character that he would never do it. He would never be willing to serve or join under another character. I suppose that I almost wish there was kind of a toggle in the game where you could say, oh, I want lore accurate things to be going on, or I don't want lore accurate things to be going on. But I mean, it's such a key component of his character where it's like, okay, if you want to have Settra as one of your characters, you have to play as Settra. But that also doesn't necessarily feel fair to the players of the other ones. That's probably one of the biggest questions I have for y'all is let me know, do y'all think that Settra should retain that gimmick? Should he retain his individuality and just stay true to his character, and that no matter how much it may inconvenience people, he doesn't care, he's Settra, therefore he cannot be confederated? Or do you think that no, Settra should get over it, it's a game mechanic, and people should be allowed to just do what they want and have fun, and it be more sandboxy, so Settra can get over it? Just let me know. In any event, the other three, I think, should absolutely be able to be confederated, because it's well established in their character and their stories that they're totally fine with essentially being confederated because they are willing to set aside their pride to focus on higher objectives. Archon the Black has only survived for as long as he has by learning to bend the knee. There have been numerous circumstances where him and Settra the Imperishable have gotten into these grind out wars, and although there wasn't able to be a really clear winner because Archon could use his flying chariot to always get away from Settra, and his sorcery allowed him to keep Settra's legions at bay, he also could not defeat Settra ever. And Archon realized that just continuing to fight Settra for eternity, which Settra would happily do, would, get in the way of his objectives. So he deliberately would always essentially kind of surrender and bow to Settra and acknowledge him as his ruler and say, yes, I understand that you're the King of Kings, you're the Kimrakara, you're the Lord, and I am a mere subject of your realm. And Archon didn't really mean it, but he was willing to tolerate serving under Settra just to get Settra to not kill him and go away so he could do his own thing. So Archon being confederated by the other characters, I think, makes perfect sense. Khalida is much the same. Khalida does not care nearly as much as most Tomb Kings when it comes to situations of purely pride. As long as she's allowed to pursue her own ambitions, mainly just getting revenge on the vampires and wiping them out so that she can eventually work her way up to Neferata and kill her, she doesn't care really if she's in charge or not. She acknowledges Settra and she acknowledges a lot of the other characters and just kind of pays them lip service, or at the very least will say, oh yeah, sure, you're in charge, but I'm going to keep doing my own thing, which is a really fascinating aspect of her character, but also why she should totally be able to be confederated. She doesn't care who's in charge as long as they don't get in her way and she's allowed to keep doing what she wants, which makes perfect sense. And then finally, Katep is a faithful servant who would eagerly take the chance to have his exile lifted. Although I don't think he would necessarily like Archon the Black. If Archon the Black was, kind of taking over, I do think that Katep would eventually get with the program, just to keep furthering his own ambitions on the side and, keep that academic research of fulfilling his oath of finding a way to cure the Tomb Kings, even if it's not for Settra directly anymore. But so all three of these characters I think are totally fine. As far for how they could be confederated, I have two ideas that I think would work best for them. The first would just be confederation through force. So tracking down that legendary lord's capital and smash it, and then you get the option to confederate them because you have proven your superiority over that Tomb King. Therefore, you have their sarcophagus hostage and are like, hey, I'll destroy this and I will literally banish you into the netherworld for all of eternity. So either serve me and get over it, or I, die forever. Those are your options. And they'd be like, okay, we're getting in line. Because that's how Settra got many of the other Tomb Kings in line, is that he literally just browbeat them through pure force and proved that he was the strongest. And eventually they all got in line and understood that he's in charge, because otherwise he was going to, basically send them into the afterlife with no way back, or worse yet, send them into just complete oblivion. Another option that I think could be really fun and interesting would be if it was actually through landmark building. So we know that the Tomb Kings have a significant amount of unique landmarks. They have all these different pyramids and tombs and stuff you can build. So what if every legendary lord among the Tomb Kings had a corresponding unique landmark that if you build it, not only does it give you its usual buffs, but it also grants you a confederation bonus or a confederation option with that lord. So for instance, if you build a specialized temple to Asaph or Khalida's pyramid in Liberis, then that gives you the option to confederate her. Or maybe it could be if you build a certain tier 4, tier 5 structure in Lamia that, empowers the Tomb Kings against the vampire counts or furthers Asaph's aims or whatever. Katep perhaps could be lured in by building a really important structure in the Black Pyramid or in Kimri, since he's from originally the city of Kimri. So perhaps there's a landmark in the city of Kimri that's at tier 5 that corresponds to the mortuary cult. And once you build that, boom, you get Katep. Or you could put it in the Black Pyramid. That way it's in kind of a neutral settlement that takes time to acquire. That way Settra isn't able to build it too quickly, so to speak. So, you're able to throw open the archives of Nagash and allow the mortuary cult to really delve in and truly master their art, which not only gives you buffs to all of your Lich Priests, but then would lure Grand Hierophant Katep to come work for you. And then for Archon the Black, obviously it should be his landmark within the Tower of Archon. That would his tower, I think, would be the perfect place, and you just have his unique landmark building. And if you build the corresponding landmark, then hey. Another option would be purchasing them. So essentially having it on the Tomb King tech tree, we could perhaps open a new branch in the tech tree that allows you to acquire each of the 3 recruitable characters, Katep, Khalida, and Archon. And basically you have to pay for them by using different resources. So, for instance, Katep, being the head of the mortuary cult and obsessed with canopic jars for all of his research and work, he maybe costs a pretty staggering amount of canopic jars or the urns. Khalida, being far more interested with more practical things and wealth, and more of the stereotypical Tomb King's desires, you have to offer her perhaps a significant amount of gold, 10k gold. And then Archon the Black could maybe be a mix of the two. Any of those would work. And the last possible thing I could think of is maybe you could even tie it in with the Books of Nagash mechanic. The Books of Nagash being kind of the unique feature to the Tomb Kings, even though we have some other characters now that have access to it. But perhaps it could be, if you're playing one of the Tomb King characters, once you acquire enough books, you have established yourself as, the ultimate power. So they realize that it's time to bow down or die. So with there being 8 books that you can get your hands on, maybe once you get, 3 books, you can confederate the nearest character. Once you get 5 books, you can then get the next nearest character. And if you get 7 books, you get the final one. If there's 3 of them, or you could just do it 3 and 6 if you're playing one of the other 3. So if you're playing Settra, for instance, maybe once you've gotten 3 books, you get the option to confederate Khalida. Once you've gotten 5 books, you get the option to confederate Archon. And then once you get 7 books, you get the option to confederate Katep. But if you're playing as Katep, after 3 books, maybe you could confederate Archon. And after 6 books, you can confederate Khalida. I don't know. I'm just shooting in the dark. Personally, I lean more towards the landmark system myself. I think that would be kind of a fun way where you are encouraged to go to war with them, to rip away those important settlements, and then kind of prove you're the boss. But it's not just a simple domination system. It's you have to beat them, take this settlement from them or whoever owns it, and then also construct this important building to really showcase your power, your right to rule. I think that could just be kind of a very unique and interesting flair for them. Moving on, the Vampire Coast. So the pirate lords of the Vampire Coast only respect one thing: infamy. I would simply, very straightforwardly, add another tier to the tech tree to the right of the recruitable admirals that just has the legendary lords that the player isn't using. So you have those 4 generic, well, they're not truly generic lords, but those 4 kind of like unique lords that you can get. Just add a tree next to that. Either expand it so you could select from any of the 7, or maybe you could even make it where you have to get one of those characters and then it has an arrow tied to the one of the legendary lords, so then you can get that. Or you could just kind of make it where it's like the rest of the Vampire Coast tree, that once you've got the Astrolabe tech, it just opens up all 7 of them. But I would have the legendary lords cost a fair bit more than the regular tech tree lords. So where the regular guys are 2,000 infamy points, perhaps one of the legendary lords costs you 3,000 or 4,000 infamy points to make it just, a bit more of a valuable thing. I think this would be a very simple solution while still being fairly unique, in that the player would need to spend that valuable campaign resource on the tech tree. And what pirate lord would not want to join alongside the most infamous lord? For as Luther Harkin himself says in the trailer, fortune favors the infamous.
Fortune favors the infamous.
Moving on, another character who I think could get away with a unique confederation system would actually be Daniel, aka Prince Yuri, aka the Demon Prince. This character is essentially the Archaon of the demonic lords, especially because Be'lakor kind of got shafted into being a Warrior of Chaos character. So Daniel has this very unique, undivided presence among characters that don't tend to have such a neutral character around. Seeing as he can already recruit exalted greater demons of the 4 chaos gods, I really don't think it would be too much of a stretch or concern to allow him to confederate the 4 greater demon legendary lords of Takari, Kugoth, Skarbrand, and Kairos. I think this would help give his faction much more unique flavor beyond just the Build-A-Prince aspect, and I think would make plenty of sense. Could make him far more attractive to players when considering a longer term playthrough, because in my experience, Daniel's campaign tends to kind of peter out once you have, kind of unlocked all of his body parts or made all of the major leaps that you wanted to do with him. Beyond that, there are some other races that already have access to Confederation who I think it would be good to smooth out. These will be very rapid fire in the interest of time and shouldn't require much explanation, so without further ado, let's just jump into it. Starting with Kislev. While Kislev does have the supporter system, which grants notable increases to diplomacy with other Kislevite factions, in addition to forced confederation should the player win the race, I think a dilemma appearing once you fill up the meter to confederate the other playable Kislev factions should appear. that allows the player to spend supporters or devotion in exchange. For instance, let's say you're playing as Katerin, and you have fully filled up the dilemma meter, so you've already confederated Kostaltin. Once that meter has been filled up, after a certain amount of turns, say maybe 10 turns, you gain a dilemma that asks the player to spend 100 devotion, let's say, to immediately confederate Boris Ursus, and your options are to either spend it and get him immediately, or you could tell it, no, I either don't have enough right now or I don't want to do it right now, come back and ask me again in 10 turns, or a third option that's just, no, I don't want him and I'm not interested in him, so the dilemma goes away and stays away. Very simple, to the point. If you're playing as Boris, maybe yours has 4 options instead of 3, so it's like, do you want to spend 100 to get Kostaltin, 100 to get Katerin, wait for 10 turns, or go away forever? And if you pick Kostaltin, for instance, then 10 turns later, it comes back with only 3 options now, being Katerin and the other 2. I think that would be totally fine and would just smooth that out a little bit, because Boris is kind of a weird third party, the way it's currently set up. Going on to Grand Cathay, I think if the Great Bastion had a unique effect that once all 3 of the wall settlements reach tier 5, that it immediately triggers a dilemma to choose whether to confederate the other dragon sibling or not. Showing that you have fully repaired and empowered the Bastion should be quite the achievement after all. So if you're playing as Miao Ying, you capture all 3 of the Great Bastion settlements, you get them all to tier 5, boom, you get the option right then to confederate your brother Miao Ying, Miao Ying. No, that is Miao Ying. Zhao Ming. There we go. I'm mixing them up. I'm combining them. And, vice versa. So if you're playing as Zhao Ming, if you take all 3 of them and hold them, etc., you then get Miao Ying. All right. On to the Lizardmen. I would really like to see the geomantic web mechanic tied directly into Confederation. It has gotten some improvements, and currently it provides some nice diplomacy buffs, but I'd love if reaching perhaps a certain number of fully empowered nodes triggered Confederation. So perhaps every 5 major settlements that you manage to get to max level on the geomantic web offers a Confederation dilemma to the nearest Lizardman legendary lord. So for instance, if you're playing Krokgar, you get offered Confederation with Tic-Tac-Toe once you've completed 5 geomantic webs, and then Oxiodal on completing 10, Nakai on completing 15, Tanuin 20, Gorak 25, and Mazamundi 30, and so on. Or perhaps it could just be that a specific legendary lord has a specific number tied to them. So like, Tic-Tac-Toe triggers once you have 3 or 5, Oxiodal triggers when you have 6 or 7, Mazdamundi requires significantly more. The only other thing I can think is, what if it was that you have to tie the geomantic web to interact with like their empire, perhaps? So for instance, if you made contact with Tic-Tac-Toe's settlements and you built up a tier 5 geomantic web, so it ends up like being a tier 5 web and it's connecting to one of his capitals. So you have, I guess you'd have a tier 2 or tier 3 connection. You're able to be like, look, I'm fulfilling the great plan better than you are, so let me confederate you. I don't know. That one's a little tricky, but those are my current thoughts at the moment. Let me know. I feel that one I don't feel as confident about that one. Let me know what y'all think. Moving down to the Dark Elves. Honestly, I think just having the ability to lure in other Dark Elf legendary lords by bribing them with a truly significant number of slaves would be ideal, and also allow the slave mechanic to have further weight and interaction. I don't know how you would necessarily be able to trigger it. Maybe it would have to be like you're not allowed to be at war with them, or maybe you have to be like defensive allies or military allies, but once you're at like a neutral or positive interaction with them, every once in a while you get a dilemma to like pay them, I don't know, 10,000 slaves, and if you do so, you get to immediately confederate them or something along those lines. I'm just not sure how the system would immediately kick in. I really wish sometimes the Dark Elves had the ability to trade slaves, like slaves were a resource that they could uniquely interact with and trade among other Dark Elf factions, because that would, I think, be able to allow that to function. So maybe that would be the goal, is allow Dark Elves to start trading slaves among each other as kind of a unique resource through diplomacy. And then you could just have a system where if you build up 10,000 slaves and you offer them in trade, it immediately turns the confederation button green, and you're able to immediately do it, assuming it's not on cooldown. That could be fun. Let me know. Then for high elves, I think it could be nice to add a new item to the influence system of the high elves, where if you spend above a certain threshold of influence on one of the other high elf factions, it enables a confederation. So for instance, let's say you're playing as Teclis and you spend at least 500 or maybe 1000 influence on Tyrion over the course of your campaign, you then gain the option to immediately confederate him should you wish. So his confederation button just turns green and you could do it whenever you want. I don't know how high the number should be. I feel like 1000 influence is a lot, so maybe 1000 should be fine, considering each individual faction you would need to spend that much influence on them. But I think that would be fair, because even if you're trying to like game the system, quote unquote, that's still a significant amount of influence. And there's 6 high elf legendary lords, so it would cost you 5,000 influence purely spent between the 5 of them. So I think that would be perfectly fair. You would just have to create a system where the game keeps track of how much influence you've spent on, each of the characters. So I think that could be done, but once again, I don't know. That would kind of be creating a new system. Let's talk about Ogre Kingdoms next. These big lads are a tad tricky, but honestly, the best I can think of is perhaps their contract mechanic they have unique access to. So for instance, let's say you're playing as Greasus and you encounter Scrag the Slaughterer, or vice versa. You would gain access to a unique contract every time your contracts refresh about accomplishing some task that impresses them, such as killing the strongest lord of their most powerful hated enemy, or capturing a notable settlement near them, or whatever. So for instance, let's say you're playing Greasus and you meet Scrag, and Scrag really hates Belagar, who's doing really well and has a high strength ranking somehow. Then along your contracts, or maybe it appears as like a unique mission, like it's treated like a contract, but it doesn't maybe show up. Well, no, I feel like it'd be better if it did show up among the 3 contracts, because then it would be able to refresh every 10 turns. So for instance, when you meet Scrag, it says, defeat Belagar Ironhammer in a battle, and you gain a confederation with Scrag. But, 10 turns later, if you haven't done that yet, and it refreshes, it would then say, okay, so you didn't do that one, but Belagar is either dead now, or he's no longer that big of a threat. So now I want you to go capture Altdorf, because, he's big enemies with Karl Franz, and Karl Franz has gotten pretty powerful. So if you sack or raise Altdorf, then he'll allow you to confederate him. I'm not sure. I think that would work great. Like, I think that would be genuinely interesting, and it would kind of help add to make the contracts more exciting, especially once we have more Ogre Kingdom characters in the game. The only thing is that I feel like it would almost need to appear as like a unique quest that's just structured like a contract, because, I feel like you wouldn't want it just taking up a contract slot, because you only get 3 slots. So it almost feels like there would need to be kind of a unique slot. Or it shows up as a quest, but then I don't know if you could still have it refresh every 10 turns if it shows up as a quest. I mean, maybe they could just simplify it and it appears as a quest that says, okay, you need to, you need to win 10 battles against enemies of Scrag, or you need to, raise 5 major settlements of Scrag's enemies, or whatever, something like that. They could also just do the Greenskin Norska system, where you just have to beat up the other character. Ogres definitely do that. Just personally, I find that very boring, and I think it'd be better to try and not reuse confederation mechanics, because I think that it just makes the game far more boring if you literally just walk up and smack someone across the head and like, oh great, I confederate them, and I literally had to do absolutely nothing, and yet I get like all the bonuses. Like, I don't think that's very fun. Next up, the Skaven. I would very much like to see Skaven characters have a unique skill similar to the Greyseer's Envoy of the Council skill, which the Envoy of the Council skill is a skill you get at level 13 on your Greyseers that adds +10 diplomacy to all Skaven factions. But imagine if there was a unique skill available to all Skaven characters that, say, became available at level 30 or level 40, that not only gave you another plus 10 diplomacy with all Skaven factions, as this character is like super impressive and badass, and has a lot of sway because, like, oh, look how scary this clan is that they have this powerful character. But I think a really fun thing to do with this skill would, what if on top of providing that little diplomacy buff, it also had like a counter system where for once you get 13 Skaven lords or heroes, I should say, to this level, and they've unlocked this ability, that essentially grants you enough influence with the Council of 13 that you start confederating all the other Skaven factors. Because getting 13 characters to like level 30 or level 40 is reasonably time consuming, and with the cooldown between confederations, it shouldn't be too abusive. So what I'm basically saying is, like, let's say you're playing Queek Headtaker, you get Queek to level 40, and then you get 12 other, a mix of your warlords, chieftains, and all your other characters. You get 13 total characters to level 30 or 40, let's say 40, and all of them have invested in this skill. Once you got that 13th character invested, every Skaven faction becomes immediately confederationable. I don't know. You can form a confederation with them. So the confederation button turns green, and you're able to immediately absorb them into your faction. However, it should probably come with a cap. You still have the 10 turn cooldown, so you wouldn't be able to just immediately like absorb everyone at once. It would be like, okay, I have contact right now with Clan Eshin, so I'm going to absorb Clan Eshin. So you do that. 10 turns later, okay, now I'm going to absorb Clan Vulcan. Okay, 10 turns later, all right, now I'm going to absorb Clan Scryer. So like once you hit that threshold, you would be able to absorb potentially a ton of territory. But I don't know, I could see that really being really fun. That might be too easy, and it also might not be possible to implement in our current system, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking. Alternatively, another option would be, what if the Skaven had like a different version of Bretonnia system? So what if we add to the tech tree that every playable Skaven clan has a tech that they're associated with that's like really far down the tech tree? Either you add a new thing for them, or you just add them on to like the highest tier tech that's associated with them. And what you could do is that, say you work your way up to the Clan Pestilence tech. Once you research the super Clan Pestilence tech, you gain the ability to immediately confederate them, just like Bretonnia does. But unlike Bretonnia, who have it kind of available immediately, and it's its own separate thing, for the Skaven, it's like much, much deeper in the tech tree. So it takes considerably more time. You have to build the right buildings, and you have to work your way up to the tech associated with a specific clan. That way it has like a very different feel to it, and it's not the exact same thing. And then finally, last but not least, the vampire counts. To put it really simply, I think vampire count should be able to spend their blood kisses to confederate the other vampire count factions. I think 10 blood kisses, maybe 10, 12, or 15, one of those three numbers. But like, if you have 10 blood kisses, I think that would be a very reasonable price to pay for immediately confederating a vampire count faction that you have made contact with, or maybe they just add it to the bloodline tree. It's like below it or whatever. But it's like, oh, I'm playing Vlad. I've gotten 10 or 15 blood kisses. So you know what? I'm going to spend these to confederate Manfred, or I'm going to spend these to confederate Kimmler. I think that would be a very reasonable price, considering how valuable blood kisses are to unlock all of the different bloodline lords. That would add just another way for them to be utilized. Because one of my biggest complaints with the vampire counts right now is that the blood kisses are great and they're awesome and allow you to get those really powerful characters, but once you have them all, they cease to function as a mechanic, which is no bueno. Like you should want to, or you should have the ability to continue using them on various things. So by adding confederation into that system, it just gives it even more mileage, which I think is very important. But that's going to be it. I believe that's all the factions that don't have a more specific system. Like the dwarves have the unique grudges. Bretonnia has their tech tree. Greenskins and Norska beat the crap out of each other. The Empire has their system. So I think that's roughly everyone. The only other question I have for you guys, I know I've asked a lot of questions of y'all, so feel free to go to town in the comments. I do read them. But the only other question I have is, do y'all think you should be able to acquire monogod characters, even if they're not the same race? So for instance, if you're playing as Scarbrand, do y'all really think we should advocate strongly for having the ability to confederate Valkia? Granted, for it to work, it would have to pull kind of the funky system that it uses with like Nakai, where when you would acquire Valkia, it wouldn't actually be like the Valkia that the AI was raising up. You'd basically be spawning a new Valkia who would come out at like some specific level and probably have her quest items already unlocked. But other than that, like she's basically like naked, like she doesn't have any traits that she's earned or anything like that. I feel like that would be the only way that would really work, because, you know, she'd kind of have to have her skill tree. She might have, actually, I don't think she'd have to have her skill tree adjusted because they're more standardized now, aren't they? Maybe that would work. I don't know. Let me know what y'all think, because I would very much like for kind of like Scarbrand and Valkia to be able to confederate each other, even if it's really gimmicky or like it's a little bit funky how it works, but I still think you should be able to do it. You know what I mean? But do let me know. Like I said, I had a ton of questions for y'all. Would love to get y'all's feedback and thoughts on this, and you know, maybe we'll talk more about it in the future. In any event, I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.